Hey, welcome back to the Delight of Miniature Painting. I'm your host, as always, Joe. Tyrant's on the field here, and we're going to be continuing to paint up our Primeval. You can see our fully painted Primeval here. But we have magnetized this kit. This kit can be magnetized. It is recommended. We've magnetized the head point. As you can see, we've magnetized the arms. And the arm. So we're going to paint up a couple of arms here today. Continuing our process, we'll talk a little bit more about how we got our skin effect, because that's going to be a lot of it today. So the way that we did this particular skin effect is we used our Pro Acryl green, and we used our Pro Acryl tan flesh, along with some washes and a little bit of a dry brush technique. So we'll go ahead and get going on that here. Let me go ahead and grab a fresh brush. Now you can use whatever brushes you want. I am a very thrifty painter for a lot of my items. So I buy the big bulk craft brush sets from like Michael's or wherever you may have. I use a lot of different brushes. And that's because I'm very hard on my brushes with the techniques that I use. So having, I do have a couple sables for more intricate work, but doing large surface areas and doing some of the techniques that I do, I have found that these cheapo brushes work just as well and are a lot more inexpensive than what I'm going through with more expensive brushes on these particular techniques. Other techniques require other brushes, so it's kind of like tools at the time. So we just start with getting kind of a quick overbrush. I call this an overbrush. You can call it a lot of different things. But basically just load with paint and then start working it into the model. And you kind of want to keep the zenithal going a bit. So you want to keep the shaded areas and the light areas picked up from that zenithal initial highlight. So we'll start with that. And we'll get it onto the claw itself. Show that here. And again, just kind of a quick technique. Because again, this is just our base layer that we're going to build up from. It's kind of quick, it's kind of wispy, because our end result is not going to be green. We want the green underneath to make the skin look more paillard and ethereal, because again, these are essentially creatures that are coming right out of the woods to go and menace those that would dare mess with Khador. And yes, I'm one that says Khador, not Khador. So, fight me. Alright, we're going to continue on with this here. And I love the Pro Acryl. I use a variety of paints in all of my techniques. I am not sort of branded one way or another. I do really like the new P3 stuff. I also am absolutely in love with the Pro Acryl. I think both of the paints complement each other well and work very nicely with different techniques that I want to use and exploit. So we'll explore that as we continue to paint in the delight of painting here. So continuing on to our next one. Again, these are all pretty quick to do because again, I don't have a ton here. And you don't need a ton of paint. And it's all right if you see this kind of splotching. That's actually what we kind of want. So I'm getting some glare here. But these tonal differences are why we do the zenithal highlight, which is a fancy way of saying we put a black base and then we use a lighter color, I use white, over the top at about a 45-degree angle, just to mimic light hitting the surface. So it creates some greater 3D compositional pieces for you automagically. Now, you don't have to use this same coloration. You can go however you want. It is your miniature. That is the beauty of painting. And painting miniatures is you can try to go and match a studio scheme, or you can create your own scheme, and you can just use the variety of techniques, trial and error. You see what works, you see what doesn't, and you go from there. All right, let's start working a little bit on the fur on these models, and we're going to build these up over a series of layers, because the fur that we're building is essentially just a series of layered colors. And again, very similar, we're just overbrushing, almost a dry brush, but with just a little more paint on it at this stage, because we're trying to get all of that white off of the model from a fur perspective. And just to be clear, we are utilizing a Pro Acryl. There it is. Pro Acryl Light Umber as the base of our fur. And I'm doing this off of a wet palette. You don't have to have a wet palette. I have just recently gone back to a wet palette after not using a wet palette for a while. I'm really enjoying utilizing a wet palette again. It just makes things nice and easy. I like the immediacy of it. You don't waste as much paint. So those are all reasons that I like a wet palette. We're going to get just a little bit more of this. Oop, that's the flesh wash. I need the light umber. Again, by Pro Acryl. There we go. Add it there a bit more firmly. And this also lets you keep painting while your green is starting to dry, so you can then start doing the rest of the technique. So if you're one that fears that you're a slow painter, there's some ways you can speed up without losing your quality, and part of that is just painting your model in stages. And when something is drying, you just work on a different part of it, or a different parcel of that model, and it lets you continue working. Also, you'll notice I'm working on several pieces at once. Again, because we're doing the same bits of color on these pieces, I'm able to do that. So this is what's called a batch process. Now, your batch process can be 2 models, and then you're 2 times faster than you would be otherwise. So there are ways to speed up your army painting without sacrificing quality. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of technique and thinking a little differently than maybe you did initially as you're painting. But again, everybody can paint. Everybody may not be able to paint at the same level, and that's okay. If everybody painted the same way, it'd be very boring out there, wouldn't it? But that's not what we have to worry about at this stage in the game. Alright, now I'm going to scare some people. So I have some Khador Red by P3, and I'm going to have some Cygnus Yellow, also by P3. We're going to remember that a little bit of the color wheel. I can take some red, some Khador Red, and I can take some of this Cygnus Yellow. I can rapidly blend them together, and I can make an orange. And then we can inject some orange streaks into our fur. And it's going to look real bright to start. It's going to look like a lot of it. We're just placing it a few points, just some spots where we want it to highlight out. And then the fun part is, if it's too much, you can take your thumb. You can take your thumb and you can blend it in. And then you can start to see it's a little less scary. At points here, you just work your finger into it. Blend it up. I am one myself that has kind of a multi-patchy beard color, which is where I got the inspiration for this on my model, because hair tends to be more interesting if you have little pops of different coloration in it. And again, that may be a little intense for some of you, but we're going to tone that down with a wash, and then we're going to tone it down with some more browns on top of it. But the fun part is, brown is a variation of orange. So it will all work together, I promise you, because your end result is going to be closer to this, as you see here. So you can pick out where I had some of that red previously on this model, where you had the reds and the oranges together. And this is just how you get to that point. So now we're going to do a flesh wash over the entirety of the model. Flesh wash I'm using is by Acryl. Big fan of this flesh wash. You can also utilize the Citadel ones. I find these pretty comparable between the two. You can be as liberal or as conservative with your washes as you wish to be. And I like to get sort of a heavy wash over my skin to start, and then let the lighter wash onto the fur itself. And use your brush to kind of take away any pooling, and you can use a separate brush, which I'll show in a second, to aid with that. And we just want to get that kind of everywhere, because we want to see how this tones down. For us. see what we like, see what we don't like on it. Try to gather into these poolings. But yeah, you can use washes in it as part of your process, and you use them at different points. They're not just a finishing element. Here we're going to start, because I have a lot of fur here, I want to start with the wash. And I kind of want to work it in a little bit, and I'm using it also, because this is still a little bit of wet orange paint, to also aid with the oranging of the model. See, we do some clever things every once in a while, guys and gals. All right, so on to here. Start working him, working that, and then back around here. Okay, I'm going to get a fresh brush. I'm going to clean that one out first. I'm going to get a fresh brush, kind of dry, and I'm just going to blot around the spots where I feel there is too much wash and redistribute it to areas where I don't feel there's enough. And again, just quick little dabbing motion is all you need. And then you can wipe it off on a paper towel or a surface. Just want to avoid the pools of the stuff, because that'll give you a really muddy look unless that's what you're going for. Sometimes you want a deep shadow and a deep pooling, and other times you just want to hint at it. That feels pretty good. All right, we're going to let those bits dry for a moment. And as they dry, we're going to prep our next color. And that color is Tan Flesh by Acryl. And the Tan Flesh is going to be used to go over the large muscle cavities and not so much the creases on these models. We're going to also, state secrets here, we're going to also mix a little bit of our light umber with some of this flesh tone to create a new highlight coloration for our fur. And I want this wash to set before that happens, so we're going to start painting up this shield while we're letting everything else kind of dry. Because again, we don't want to waste our time. So we're going to use a little bit of Turquoise by Acryl. And we're going to use it to start highlighting the ram's head here, or goat head, the skull on the model here. We're just going to take a little bit of it. We don't need much. And we're just going to start working it into the model. Hold it by the edge. Around, I am a big fan of this color. And I'm going to try to highlight these little engravings with it. We'll see how well I do, and we're going to use some techniques that will help on the rest of this, because really we're just kind of blocking it out right now. And we will come back to it. Okay. Now this is going to be kind of gorish. I'm going to take some of our tanned flesh and just a hint of our yellow. So a bit of the tanned flesh, bit of the yellow, bit more of the tanned flesh, about a 2-to-1 in terms of the tanned flesh to the yellow, almost a 3-to-1 ratio as I'm mixing it in here. And we're going to start painting this shield, because the shield is really like a leatherish shield. So this gives me this kind of interesting coloration that I can use for the leather or skin, which is what we're really trying to indicate. Is this is not people that you want to be going up against, because they give their beasts, skin shields. So I wonder how they got those. I'm assuming by killing their enemies and then skinning them alive or dead. I don't know. I'm not one of them. I just enjoy the army and enjoy thinking about ways we can tell a story with our miniatures. So, telling a little bit of a story here with this paint scheme, that this is not who you want to mess with. And we'll come back with some more coats as that dries. I think the brim of it is it's a cursed shield, just for everyone's awareness. I think on the outside of it, we're going to go with some P3 solid gold. Which is kind of a nice bronzy type gold for the outside, just to start blocking it off, blocking it out. All right, that is dry enough that I can hold it. More paint. There we go. Bring that on up for our close-up Mr. DeVille. Alright, now we can take a little bit of this tanned flesh and start to highlight, points to highlight. Again, just really want to leave the green in the areas it makes sense to. In the areas it doesn't, we just start to cover up with that. And a little bit of a dab technique. And then we will wash that again. And we'll do the same thing here. Again, we're going for paillard ethereal style flesh. So that's why we are doing this the way that you see, to give it that ethereal look where it's sickly and disturbing, almost human, but not quite. Because that's the point, is we want it to be unnerving. We don't want it to look like things you find in nature, but we also want it to look natural. It's preternatural, or supernatural. It's just not what we expect in our day-to-day. Even in the Iron Kingdoms, where magic is a real thing. I like this paillard, unnatural look. All right, and then I'm going to come over the top here with what will essentially be a dryish brush of the skin tone onto this yellow of that tanned flesh. Okay, now we're going to take some of our tanned flesh and some of our light umber. Mix those together. About a 2-to-1 tanned flesh to umber to create this sort of ultralight umber. And I just want to pick out some little splotches. At points. And then we're going to use our finger technique again. Kind of work that in. Again, just creating visual points of interest on the model where we've got indications of this hair that are going to be lighter than other spots. And you can go as light or as dark as you want on your model. Now your beast can be totally different. Put a little bit of this coloration on the shield, around the edges, towards the center where the leather might be a little more tanned. Again, just generating visual interest. I'll do another coat of the gold. And some spots. And get the gold around the edges. Just building this up slowly over layers. Start to see we want a little more on this guy. A little more there. More there. All right, let's get some wash. More of this flesh-colored wash out, and I want to wash down again our fur. And we'll wash down the skin again. And then our shield, we're going to not use a flesh wash, we're going to use Null oil by Citadel. This is one of those Cadillac washes. I highly recommend you get it into your paint inventory. It's been referred to a lot of different names. My favorite name for it is Liquid Talent, but it just flows well onto models and surfaces, and it has some pretty unique properties for a wash. Most of the Citadel washes do. I just particularly enjoy how this one tends to work. Over even the Pro Acryl, which I'm a pretty big fan of, as I've talked about. I use a lot of Pro Acryl, I use a lot of P3, I use some Citadel. Citadel mostly for washes now. I don't really like their paint line, although their paint line is fine. I do use some Vallejo as well, although no Vallejo on this part of the project so far. So letting this kind of dry, we can start thinking about our blade on this particular model here, this particular portion of the model over here. Start thinking about the blade. I think I'm going to utilize some of this cold steel. from P3. Again, part of their regular paint set. Utilize some cold steel with it. Just load up the brush here a little bit and start painting that on. This is kind of fun color. To be working with. Let me come over to the other side here. This down. Alright, we're going to want some whites and yellows on this because this is supposed to be like a bone sword. I like starting with a metallic base sometimes on weaponry, even if it's going to end up being kind of organic, because that's just what I like. But we're going to go ahead and let that dry, and in our next episode, we'll finish these guys up and have our full primal, and then we'll start working on our feral. Thank you. Please like and subscribe and join us in the next one. And always remember that painting is a delight.